Hi everyone. So today we'll be discussing the elements of design. So we'll be tackling point, line, plane, shape, texture, form, space, color, and value. So elements of design, so you have your point. A point marks a position in space, so conceptually it has no length, width, or depth, and therefore static, centralized, and directionalist. Dimensionless geometric element, it is a geometric element that has no property but location, such as an intersection of two lines. So, um, especially now that in the we're still in the pandemic stage, so I guess for you guys to actually go around and experience architecture or structure interior, it might be of limit, but I think one way to denote or to express how a point works is through your location or pinning in your location through Grab Delivery or Grab Express. That whenever you're trying to earmark your residence, you pinpoint or you drop pin, so it actually gives a location in well, it actually gives out your location. So point is the prime element in vocabulary of form. So a point can serve to mark two ends of a line, the intersection of two lines, the meeting of lines at the corner of a plane or volume, and the center of a field. So for the center of the field, we have these two representations of drawings. So you have the intersection of lines. This is an intersection of multiple lines or multiple lines and radiating through a central point. And then same for the second, you have a circular, you have circles or concentric of circles radiating through a central point. And the third one is basically possibly a landmark, or you can say a representation of a landmark uh, that meets or that, let's say, intersects in the central point. So in the next drawing, so you have 2 points. So it ends the line. So this is the um, endpoints, and then this would be your central intersection point. So you have your two lines, so this is your intersection, and then this is meeting of lines at the corner of a plane or a volume. So the meeting of the lines at a corner or a plane of a volume is very prevalent in space planning, even in architecture and interior design. So sometimes, in actual sense, the point would actually represent a column. This would actually serve as a structural member in architecture and in interior design as well. So you have points that contain a space. So and then points that would act and a point that would actually create um, uh, let's say a center of a field or a center of an architecture and interior space. So although a point theoretically has neither shape nor form, it begins to make its presence felt when placed within a visual field. So at the center of its environment, a point is stable and rests, so organizing surrounding elements about itself and dominating in its field. So in this representation on your right, so you have three squares, so three planes. We mark the point at the center, so dead center. So therefore, directing your eye. So any surrounding elements would actually be organized or stable. So giving it um, equal equal proportion or equal sections. So also you can see in this um, last plane, which is basically, since the point is dead center, it's creating an equal distribution of rings or circle around it. So I think you see this whenever you throw a pebble or a rock in the ocean. It creates a ripple effect. So it is an organized reaction to dropping of a central point. So when the point is moved off center, however, its field becomes more aggressive and begins to compete for visual supremacy. So visual tension is created between the point and its field. So In these, the next three planes would actually express that moving of the point off center would actually create a tension. So from the central point, move on to the upper right corner. So it actually brings out the tension here while releasing the stresses on this side. So I think the second plane would be a good visual representation on the tension that was created because of the movement of the point. Same for the third plane, which is basically um, uh, moving the point of reference, and you can see that there is a constraint or there is a tension of the lines given it doesn't have the equal distribution that it has on the center point of reference. So a point has no dimension, so to visibly mark a position in place or a ground plane, so a point must be projected vertically into a linear form. So you have your this is very prevalent in classical architecture. So you can see this in columns, obelisk, or a tower. So any columnar element is seen in plan as a point and therefore retains the visual characteristics of a point. So other point-generated forms that share the same visual attributes are the circle, the cylinder, and the sphere. So as you can see in columns, obelisk, and tower, you have a central point. Sometimes it's very visible when you look at it in plan view. So another, as you can see, so examples na lang of point in a circular plan view. So you have the circle. So the point is the circle has a central point, so it actually draws your eye here. So this is very prevalent in classical architecture where the dome would actually serve. So you have the oculus, that which is actually a point of reference in classical architecture that brings in light. So it has almost a spiritual or um, let's say a visual appeal to it. So you have your cylinder. So your cylinder, you have your central point, and then projected vertically. So this is another example of your columns. So your baptistery at Pisa, Italy, and then you have your sphere. So a sphere is having a central point in all of its all of the sides, therefore creating this sphere-like shape. So an example is the cenotaph for Sir Isaac Newton. So you have it is usually depicted in a dome-like precedence, but it's actually a sphere. So another example is the Piazza di Campidoglio in Rome by Michelangelo Buonarroti. So the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius actually marks the center of this urban space. So this is very prevalent in architecture and in urban planning when you are trying to establish a landmark or a point of reference for, let's say, wayfinding even, and also for historical events. So what we have here in Cebu is your Fuente Osmeña. It actually draws you into its central. It has a central fountain that would actually earmark the center of Cebu City. So 2 points. So another use of points. So 2 points describe a line that connects them. So although the points give this line finite length, the line can also be considered as a segment of an infinitely longer path. So in this drawing, you have 2 points. So it would actually signify the segment since the point can serve as an initial termination and or a segment when once you place it in a longer or in a length, it would actually create it is considered a segment of an infinitely longer path. So this one can be um, can the point would actually serve as a initial termination which symbolizes a connection also. So the point is used as a connection for this drawing. So 2 points further suggest an axis, so perpendicular to the line they describe and about which they are symmetrical. So because these axes are symmetrical, um, this axis may be infinite in length. It can be at times more dominant than the described line. So in both cases, however, the described line and the perpendicular axis are optically more dominant than the infinite number of lines that may pass through each of the individual points. So this is the representation for that. So in plan, so 2 points can denote a gateway signifying passage from one place to another. So extended vertically, the 2 points define both a plane of entry and an approach perpendicular to it. So 2 points established in space by columnar elements or central forms can define an axis. So in this case, so you have the two columns. So this is from Tori Ise Shrine in Japan. So the points would signify the post for the gateway. So these points um, define the axis. So it divides throughout history. So to organize building forms and spaces. So this is used. So the point is used as a columnar element to create a centralized form. So therefore, you have this gateway. So locating points. So this is very prevalent when you'll be dealing with architectural drawings and also in product and interior design. So this will be utilized in your AutoCAD, even with your SketchUp and your form. So the line or the meeting point, which would actually serve with the x, y, and z axis. So the base point of any area would be your 0, 0, 0 coordinates. So that would be the base, and then anything that will actually run through it would have your x, y's, and your z coordination. So x would signify your length, y for the width, and z for your height. So focal element. So focal element, as discussed in our previous meeting, it's identification of a place. It's a point of relevance where an object is aligned or attached, and it's a major idea, which is a central part of a salient feature of a narrative or concept. So, as depicted in the photos on your right, we have the Jewel at Changi Airport and a fountain at this and a busy in a let's say in a central part in an urban landscape. So for the Jewel Airport, as you can see, you have a surrounding elements around it, therefore drawing in your attention to the central portion. I think the point would serve as a focal element given its manner. So it's very literal. So even all of the treatments or the elements would actually direct to that central point. And then also for the photo on the left, which is it's an urban landmark as well. So it's a central point. Usually the central point or focal element draws your attention. So in interior, point can be used as a source of light, focal element, and etc. So in interior design, a focal point can, as discussed in our previous, can actually be in any form that has a um, visual weight. So in this, the form is the focal point will actually be in the layout and all of the elements pertaining to it. So it would actually depend on what treatments that you're trying to apply, therefore giving it an extra visual weight. So in this one, you have your lights. So in buildings, point can be identified as joints in a structural component or point of attachment to a wall or on an object. So the focal point of this building draws you into the architectural structure of it. So when you look at the composition of the photo or the architectural architecture is interior architecture is actually the ceiling design, and then the way of the layout, or let's say the orientation of the space. So in this design you have the orientation of the this um, platform here at the middle. So as you can see, all of the seats are directed, and even the ceiling treatment is directed to that wall. So elements of design, we have now your line. So line is a geometric element generated by moving point and having extension within the breadth or thickness. So a point extended becomes a line. Conceptually, a line has length but no width or depth, whereas a point is in nature static. So a line is describing a path of a point in motion and is capable of visually expressing direction, movement, and growth. So as you can see in the slide, so you see the line transforming, therefore creating visual communication, like with regards to, I think when we see this line, it's usually perceived in music, in wavelength, and in waves, or in active motion. So a line is a critical element in the formation of any visual construction. So it can serve to join, link, support, surround, or intersect other visual elements. So it describes the edges of and gives shapes to planes and articulate the surfaces of planes. So lines has properties such as length, direction, and position. So in the first grouping, so you have line as a joint or a connection between two elements. In the second, you have line as a link and a support. So with this one, you have line. So this line, this vertical line, actually supports the horizontal line. Therefore, and then balancing out the two elements on each side. So this is very prevalent in architecture, interior construction. You have your post and lintel. And then in this third object, so you have line that actually surrounds or encloses the space. So this encloses the elements that are inside. So um, line also describes the edges of and gives shapes to planes. So with this, the line draws in to enclose the space for it to take shape. So this is the square. You have your triangle and your circle. So it also articulates the surface of the plane. So therefore, this actually gives off enclosure, or let's say um, linkages from start to finish. So line has properties such as length, direction, and position. So with this, the last grouping of the shape. So you have squares in different textures. So and different line compositions. With this, you there is a difference in perception. So even if they have the same shape, they have different visual perceptions. So in your first square, so you have lines in horizontal position that actually is calming, and when you look at it, it feels like it has the stability of that of a very calm, like calm seas or calm ocean. So the next would be you have your diagonal lines, but actually portrays action or direction. So as you can see, the diagonal lines are a bit more active than that of the horizontal line. So it's more um, let's say it's a bit more graphic than it is to the horizontal. So the third is a crosshatch. Basically, it gives texture, and it uh, brings in more weight than to the first two line composition. So as you can see, the up like the perpendicular or the opposite combination of two diagonal lines um, create this volume, or creates this weight, a visual weight. So the orientation of a line affects its role in visual construction. While a vertical line can express a state of equilibrium with the force of gravity, force of gravity symbolizes the human condition or marks a position in place. So therefore, you have that very vertical elements in architecture. You have your obelisk or the towers, which just actually symbolizes human condition in place. So when you're standing, so that is express of equilibrium with the force of gravity. So a horizontal line can represent stability, so the ground, the plane, the horizon, or a body at rest. So what I described earlier, so whenever you're at the beach, or at the beach, or up to the mountains and looking through the horizon, you feel that you are grounded, you are at rest, and you are relaxed. So, a different comparison of which would be that of large or waves in the ocean. So, when you see there is a disruption of the horizontal line, you see that this is unstable, or it's unsafe, or something that uh, is very active and alive. So an oblique line is a deviation of the vertical and horizontal. So it may seen as a vertical line falling, or a horizontal line rising. So in either case, whether it's falling down towards a point on the ground plane or rising to a place in the sky, it is dynamic and visually active in its unbalanced state. So um, in design, so um, either whether it be in architecture, interior design, so this oblique line which actually create an active state. So let's say for architecture, let a good representation would be a leaning tower of Pisa. So given that the orientation, or it was actually tilted not on purpose, but it has the let's say the impression that it is falling, or it is about to collapse. It gives the impression of that. With interior design, whenever, let's say, and a good example, or interior design or in furniture design, so a good example would be the rocking chair. So when you rock to and from, that creates an active or a dynamic line, which it feels like you're living on the edge. So it's a different way of thinking about it, but it is in itself in a dynamic stage. So vertical linear elements such as column, obelisk, and towers have been used throughout history, so to commemorate significant events and establish particular points in space. So from your prehistoric up to your Renaissance, even to your Renaissance and your medieval. So these are areas. Moment. These are times or eras or periods in design where it is where the use of vertical linear elements is very prevalent, especially through the course of history. So you have your men here. So a prehistoric monument consisting of an upright megalith, and then you have your column of Marcus Aurelius. So it's a cylindrical shaft, commemorates the emperor's victory over Germanic tribes, and then obelisk of Luxor. So as you can see, it's a vertical member. So vertical linear elements can define a transparent volume space. So in the example is to the left. So four minaret towers outline a spatial field from which the dome of the Salem Mosque rises in splendor. So as you can see, you have your vertical elements surrounding linear members that possess the necessary material strength can perform structural functions. So in these three examples, linear elements express movement, provide support for an overhead plane and form a three-dimensional structure frame for architectural space. So this is we usually see it in engineering and field of architecture, also in interior design. So this is this line express the movement across the space. So this is bridging two mountains, or let's say two areas, and the vertical lines provide support for this overhead plane. And this the curved line would actually bring up a structural support that adheres to the vertical and to the horizontal plane. So and therefore you have a three-dimensional structural frame. So a line can be an imagined element, rather it can be a visible one in architecture. So an example is the axis of a regulating line established by two distance points in space about which elements are symmetrically arranged. So in this plan, you have a symmetrical arrangement of plan, or the planning of a space, or the planning of an area. So although architectural space exists in three dimensions, it can be linear in form to accommodate the path of movement. So through a building and link its space to one another. So building can be linear in form, particularly when they consist of repetitive spaces organized along a circulation path, as illustrated here. So linear buildings forms have the ability to enclose exterior spaces as well and adapt to environmental conditions of a site. So this is very prevalent in urban planning, in architecture, and in design. So whenever they do planning, we have to adjust to the space and understand the site, or yeah, the area in which we'll be building. It also goes well with interior design, where usually the orientation or the flow would actually dictate from the path of movement. So this is very prevalent in office circulations and planning. So at a smaller scale, line articulate the edges and surfaces of plane and volume. So these lines can be expressed by joints within or between building materials, by frames around window or door openings, or by structural grid of columns and beams. So this is very prevalent in both architecture and interior design. It's very much experienced through architecture, since we experience these are very visual approach, especially in larger scale construction. So how these linear elements affect the texture of a surface will depend on their visual weight, spacing, and direction. So um, these are an example. So you have it would actually vary with regards to the spacing and the weight that it has. So you have, for example, on your right, so the Seagram building. So you have um, the vertical line. As you can see that the visual weight of the perimeter outline is very visible to that of the interior. So as you can see, there is the visual uh, visible lines would be your perimeter columns, and then the horizontal, let's say, beams that are intersecting with it. So in this photo, you see that there are different visual perceptions when even with the spacing of the line. So here you see that they are closed space. So there is a weight, and there is it actually creates thickness, a visual weight that is really and um, compact and almost solid, leaning to solid na. So here you have a gradual increase in spacing, therefore creating an idea that is actually spacious or airy, or has um, has and like it's open, or something of the same idea. So as you can see here, so the visual weight on the spacing. So given that you have the paneling of the glass here, but we it was removed here in the baseline, would actually give the, let's say, a man's eye view that this is visually let's say maaliwalas or visually airy or open. So compared to that of the upper texture. So two parallel lines have the ability to visually describe a plane. So a transparent spatial membrane can be stretched between them to acknowledge their visual relationship. So the closer the lines are to each other, the stronger will be the sense of plane they will convey. So in this, you have two parallel lines that have the ability to describe a plane. So you have equally spaced. So this is very prevalent in architecture, classical architecture, the prevalence of um, very symmetrical planning and then equally spaced. So I think everyone we are actually going back to um, this occurring this visual design element that is more on a play of repetition and a play of asymmetrical and plus repetition or something like that. So in this one, this is very prevalent in classical architecture. This okay, so and then it actually plays in a very strong and very authoritative approach. So the series of parallel lines with the repetitive reinforce our perception of the plane. So as they describe. As these lines extend themselves along the plane they describe, the implied plane becomes real and the original voids between the lines revert to being more interruptions of the planar surface. So with this one, you have your s- let's say a planar surface. So this would be your plane given the form and the structure, and the repetition of these lines would actually um, let's say more of an interruption to a planar space. So this is sometimes this can be um, this would serve as a design or an accent or a treatment. So the third one is the diagram illustrates the transformation of a row of round columns initially supporting a wall, then evolving into square piers which are integral of the wall plane. So and finally become pilasters, remnants of the original columns, occurring as a relief along the surface of the wall. So with this one, you have your columns, and then in this you are actually evolving it to square to compensate with the original plane, which is the square plane. So the column is a certain strengthened part of the wall carried up perpendicular from the foundation to a top. So a row of columns is indeed nothing but a wall, open and discontinued in several places. So one example is so whenever you're doing construction, a column is basically the supporting structure to that of your wall. So the wall doesn't really hold much of a weight unless it is a structural or a load-bearing wall. So with this, you have so as you can see in the plan, these are as columns which would serve as a structure. So this it would actually, let's say, be perceived here in the spaces between the windows. So the linear members of trellises and pergolas can provide a moderate degree of definition and enclosure for outdoor spaces while allowing filtered sunlight and breezes to penetrate. So, in architecture or interior design, we can actually use these elements to, let's say, f- um, perceived enclosure. So, it doesn't really have to be a built up wall. So sometimes in interior we use repetition of columns and linear members to enclose a space. So, so okay. So the edge or contour of a shape. So okay. So linear members. So even also in architecture. So let's say for lanai or for outdoor planning, whenever you want to have a certain degree of protection from rain, from sunlight, or from weather, you create trellises and pergolas to contain or to reduce the amount of, let's say, rain or sunlight to filter it out. So the edge of contour of a shape, so you have your vertical, so perpendicular to a plane, horizontal, parallel to the plane over the horizon, and oblique, so neither parallel nor perpendicular to a given line or a surface. So okay. So in interior, line can be used as a pattern, texture, furniture components, partition, light strip, and etc. So in this, you see the lines. There are actually um, multiple application of the line in its form. So you have a linear wood ceiling treatment that would reflect up to the wall dividers. So as you can see, the line is a prevalent element in this design, as well as partition, so enclosing the dining area and to the service area. Even with the furniture treatments, you have your linear tufted seats and even down to your flooring. So this is very um, it's a very tricky way because you have to balance the elements well, in which the the plane or the ceiling, the structure, and the floor would serve as like the color black would serve as the base surface to which the linear lines are accentuated. So in structures, line can be identified as structural linear components. So in this design, as you can see that the lines serve as a structural design to which gives shape and form and interest into the space. So as you can see, the vastness of the space is actually balanced with the intricacy and the form of the line that is represented through the ceiling and the structural membranes. So, okay, you have your okay. Okay, we're now moving on to plane shape and texture. So, elements of design, you have your plane. A line extended in a direction other than the intrinsic direction becomes a plane. So, conceptually, a plane has length and width but no depth. So lines when connected to create an enclosed element is plane. So planes has properties such as length and width, shape, surface, orientation, and position. So a surface generated by a straight line moving at a constant velocity with respect to a fixed point, such as that of a straight line containing any two of its points, lies whole in a surface. So in a composition of a visual construction, a plane serves to define the limits. So it limits our boundaries of volume. So if architecture as a visual art deals with specifically with the formation of three-dimensional volumes of mass and space, then the plane should be regarded as a key element in vocabulary of architecture and design. So in this, you have different planes. So this is the main plane in which uh, it lies flat. So whenever it is added up or add its details, it creates volume. So in plan, this in design in interior design. So whenever we do planning, we have this plan or plane, and then when we slowly build up, you have in architecture and design, or in built environment, you start to have form and space or an enclosure of a space. So in here, with an addition to a plane, you create a shape or a form. So this one, you have your walls and you have your perimeter walls. So let's just understand it in a way that is in relation to a built environment. So this have you have your uh, oh, that of a perimeter wall, or this one you have your perimeter wall, so have your four walls, and then whenever you enclosed it, so it becomes a form, so it actually takes shape. So planes in architecture define the three-dimension volumes of mass and space. So the properties of each plane have your size, shape, color, and texture. So as well as your spatial relationship to one another, ultimately determine the visual attributes of the form they define and those qualities of the space they enclose. So this is one example of what I described earlier. So in architecture or in space, in built environments, you have this properties and creating or volumes to create that of a space. So an example, this would be your floor, this would be your wall, and this would be your ceiling. So this is the plane in which all of it will lie. So in an architectural plan, we manipulate these three generic types of planes. So architecture and design. So in built environment, you have your overhead plane. So the overhead plane can either be the roof plane, and that spans that shelter the interior space of a building from climatic elements, or the ceiling plane that forms an upper enclosing surface of the room. So in interior design, or in built environment, we have these planes. So the base plane would be the wall. So the base plane could either serve as ground plane, that serves as the physical foundation or the visual base. So this is what the ground you'll be stepping on, or the surface on that in which we walk. The wall plane, because of its vertical orientation, is active in our normal field of vision and vital to the shaping and enclosure of our architectural space. So it is very integral when we utilize these planes in translating our ideas, or translating uh, what we're trying to relay through visual communication. So in relation to historical approaches in plain. So dolmen, a prehistoric monument consisting of two or more upright stones supporting a horizontal stone slab. So it is found in Britain and France and usually regarded as a burial place for important person. So as you can see, you have the base plane here, your walls, and then your ceiling or your roofing plane. So the roofing plane essential in sheltering element that protects the interior of a building from climactic. So um, the form and geometry of its structure is established by a manner in which spans across the space to bear its own supports and slopes to shed rain and melting snow. So mantay snow dere, so it would basically shelter us from exterior exterior weather, or an exterior occurrence in weather. So in this one, so as I shown in the previous discussion, so this will actually has a planar quality, therefore creating creating shelter to that of the interior space. So interiors are made up of surfaces such as table surface, shelves, TV, computer screen, cabinet, cover, floor, and ceiling. So in interior space, we are anything that can be, let's say, experienced through touch or through a visual weight is actually a surface or a plane. So you have your wall, your cabinetry, and then your flooring, even up to your tables and to your shelving. So we're moving on to shape. So shape is the primary identifying characteristic of a plane. So shape, it is determined by the contour of a line forming the edges of a plane because our perception of shape can be distorted by perspective foreshortening. We see the true shape of a plane only when we view it frontally. So whenever we, even when we experience interior or architecture, so um, that's where we visually perceived um, these forms. So that's why you have your front view, your side view, your back back view, and your perspective view. So you'll see its true form when you see, or its true shape when it's directly view it up front. So some supplementary properties of plane is surface color, pattern, and texture. So it affects its visual weight and stability. So the outline or surface configuration of a particular form or figure, while form usually refers to the principle that gives a unity to a whole and often includes a sense of mass, volume. So shape suggests an outline with some emphasis on the enclosed area or mass. So in this one, so this actually um, maybe will have a perceived notion that this is a concrete block or a cement block. So in form and its actual or its visual weight, it will have this square or squared form, and you have your visual texture that may be defined through the aggregates or the concrete finish. So same for these. This might be, let's say, wire mesh or something of the like. So whenever you see materials, you see them for their form. With the plane, you'll see them for the shape or the surface that they actually, or the actual visual weight. So So with this, a shape really suggests the outline. So whenever you see your phone or look at your whenever you look at objects, when you see them in this, let's say when you're looking at your laptop or your PC right now, so what you see is the shape, which is might be rectangular or nature, or might be square, or you know um, so that's the visual weight that it projects on you. So you see the outline and the edges of that of the shape. Our perception of shape depends on the degree of visual contrast that exists along the contour. So this is separating a figure from its ground or between a form and its field. So in the photos on your right, so it actually creates a visual contrast. It depends on the background or the field in which it lies. So in the first photo, the perception is, since we have this area of negative space, it actually contrasts, or the object contrasts that of to the background. So same as the following. So in the next, you have your, this is your, when your positive and negative space comes in. So this would be the negative space, and sorry, negative space that it takes up, and that's the positive space that takes in. So same with this one. So in architecture, we are concerned, architecture and interior design, we're concerned with the shapes of floor, wall, and ceiling planes that enclose the space. So door and window openings within a spatial closure, silhouettes and contours of building and interior forms, and just of interior forms. So in the examples here on the right, so you have different uh, planar or different, um, let's say, take on spatial distribution, or you know space distribution or perception. So these are all in orthometric views. So you have different perception even with the application of texture. So gestalt psychology affirms that the mind was simply simplify the visual environment in order to understand it. So given any composition of form, we tend to reduce the subject matter in our visual field to the simplest and most regular shape. So the simpler and more regular a shape is, the easier it is to perceive and understand. So these are examples. So that's why um, even in drawings or in freehand drawings, we start even with the base shapes before we establish the intricacies or the details that goes later on in the design. So even in furniture design, we start off with the base form of that of a chair, which is usually square in nature, and then we develop all the details that goes on when forming or developing a furniture. So for geometry, we know the regular shapes to be circle and an infinite series of polygons that be inscribed in it. Of these, the most significant are the primary shapes, so the circle, the triangle, and the square. So a circle, so a plane, so this curved and through every point in which is equidistant from from a fixed point within the curve. And then your triangle, so you have a placed figured bounded by three sides and having three angles. So you have three angles there. And then a square, so a plane figure having four equal sides and four right angles. So your right angles would mean you have your 90 degrees on all sides. That's your square. So compositions of circles and circular segments. So you have different compositions derived from one shape. So an example of which, so you have different compositions that actually portray um, different visual cues. So you have this for balance. Um, so you have balance and you have this active form of balancing. So it has all this at the same. It has the same sizes, the same disposition, but it is actively directed in the design. So here, so you also have these details on hand. So the compositions of circles and circular elements vary. So you have your neutral. So the neutral would be in the ground at the center. Your stable, which would actually put the weight here on the ground. Unstable, whenever you do think of when, unstable, given that it is portrayed in a way that would actually, let's say if this is a rolling ball, when you put a weight on the end or the side, it will actually roll over or you move over. And then you have your equilibrium. So it is the force of gravity. So you have your stable, self-centered, you have here, and dynamic, which actually portrays movement. And then you have fixed in place. So you have here that would actually signify that it is uh, affixed here, given that like a quarter of it is actually displaced in the exterior. So the triangle signifies stability. So when resting on one of its sides, the triangle is extremely stable figure. So when tipped to a stand of one of its vertices, however, can be unbalanced in a precarious state of equilibrium or be unstable to tend to fall over onto one of its sides. So this is the balance or the stable figure of that of a triangle. So this one also. So since you have the horizontal plane adhere to the floor or in line with the floor, then it is stable. Same was this one. So there's a different the balance between the vertical and the horizontal line would actually create the stability that we want for this form. For the drawing here at the bottom, so you have um, let's say three triangles, solid triangles. You have equal spacing and stable positioning, and then you place in same shape or same sized triangle, therefore creating an equal distribution of the weight from the top top na shape. This as well creates also, so as you can see that these are very um, like usual things that you, I think, as a child you've encountered. So whenever you're playing with blocks, um, having a base would actually serve as a foundation to which you'll be building the rest of your blocks or your modules or your. And then on the last one, so given if this is in when you build this with blocks, so uh, this won't be stable, given this would serve as the single or unifying element for the whole blocks. So it doesn't carry on load or weight or even a base foundation. So this basically the point is where all of the weight goes to. So I doubt, given unless you have expertise in building blocks, then this is possible. So the square represents the pure and the rational. So it's bilaterally symmetrical figure having two equal and perpendicular axes. So all other rectangles can be considered variations of the square. So your deviations from the norm. So with you might be adding height or width or an additional um, an extension of that from the square. So, like a triangle, the square is stable when resting. So, one of its sides and dynamic when standing, or one of its corners. So, when it's diagonal or vertical and horizontal, the square exists in the balanced state of equilibrium. So, this is your square in the resting state, the square in let's say in a dynamic state, same as this one. So if you're an architect, if you want to come up with an architecturally um, with a forward thinking, let's say, design or a module that you want to test the limits of gravity, so or perceived notion of gravity. So you create an irregular or a dynamic form. So this would be the point of equilibrium. So this where all of the weight will lie on. So usually in architecture or in design, that you create um, a, a balance or a counterweight here at the base to support that of your design. So these are different representations of square and its composition. So you have the intersection and interrelation of square in different orientation. You have the intersection of two squares, and then you have the addition and the rounding of the square and your base square. So the pyramid is composed of basic triangle shape on its main surface of its pyramidal form. So whenever you look at the pyramid, so it's very I think when as children, whenever you do drawings of pyramids, basically a square. So in interior, so interior it's composed of shapes such as oval, round, rectangular, and free form shapes. So um, this can be visible through treatments and applications, even to the flooring and to the lights as well. So multiple elements actually take shape in the interior design. So moving on to texture. So in addition to shape, planes and its surface have visual tactile properties in texture. So the visual and especially tactile quality given to a surface where size, shape, and arrangement and proponents of texture. So texture also determines the degree to which the surface of a form reflect or absorb incident light. So the visual and especially tactile quality of a surface apart its color of form. And then visual texture, so it's the apparent texture of surface resulting with a combination and interrelation of colors and even to tonal values. Your tactile texture is the physical and dimensional structure of a surface, so it's apart from the color and form. So Texture is a specific quality of a surface that results from a three-dimensional structure. So the texture is almost often used to describe the relative smoothness or roughness of a surface. So it can also be used to describe the characteristic surface qualities of familiar materials, such as the roughness of a stone, the grain of wood, and the weave of a fabric. So these materials, which com- combined create a visual and tactile experience in whether in architecture and interior design. So there are two basic types of texture. You have your tactile, which is real and can be felt, and then you have your visual texture, which can be seen by the eye. So in most of the design, so all tactile texture provide visual texture as well. So visual texture, on the other hand, may be illusionary or real. So our sense of sight and touch are closely intertwined. So as our eyes read the visual texture of a surface, we often respond to its apparent tactile quality without actually touching it. So whenever you look or experience a space, let's say when you're at home, and then you see the composition of materials in your space, then you have a mix. When you see the actual composition of space, then you have your visual texture working for you. So with the absence of touch is the visual texture that's actually feeding into your brain. So also in design, textures play a role in um, a role in the composition and the grandness of things. So, since interior design and architecture can be experienced to can be highlighted and experienced to the tactile aspect of it. So whenever we go interior, we experience it given it's a built environment. So we feel the finishes, we touch the fabrics, we experience the space as we live in it, we work with it, and then we build it. So we base these physical reactions to the textural qualities of surfaces on previous associations with similar materials. So linear patterns have the ability to emphasize the height or length of the form, unify its surfaces, and define its textural quality. So here you can see let's say for a building, the visual texture of let's say a metal can actually be perceived in a tactile way as cold or like as cold and sometimes cold and very rigid. So that's already an association of past experiences. So texture and color together affect the visual weight and the scale of a plane and the degree to which it absorbs or reflect light and sound. So this is very prevalent in interiors in which we play on the varying degrees of texture and we utilize it through forms, through patterns, and through materials. So the color and texture of these forms and in surfaces affect the reflectivity and the ambient light level within the space. So the surface, color, texture, and pattern of a plane affect our perception of its visual weight, scale, and proportion. So as you can see, so there is a visual weight. So when there is texture in a in a horizontal, in a short and a horizontal plane, you can see that it would come off as heavy or it has its weight on it. So the larger, let's say we move on to the next photo in which we have a larger square, but it is empty. So it has a perception of space and it's spacious and it feels like doesn't hold much weight given the texture is plain. So this is usually applied in um, interior paints. Whenever when you apply darker colors, it would actually have a visual weight that it's sometimes like um, it would come off as heavy or sometimes it comes off masculine. So and the next you have your spaced texture or space pattern. So it feels, given the direction of the line, we have your vertical lines would actually bring up or feel longer. So for horizontal plane to be seen as a figure, there must be a perceptible change in color or tone or texture between its surface and that of the surrounding area. So for example, when you're building or creating construction or a building or a residence. So the contrast between the plane in which you're about to build and to the surrounding environment uh, would would have a perceptible change in color and tone. So in interior design as well, so then in addition to an area rug or an accent floor, we'll see as a change in texture of a surface to that in relation to the surrounding area. So it would actually draw in your eye and creating a visual or a focal emphasis to that. So separation of plane can be merely implied with a changing in level or a contrast in surface material or a texture between two places. So this is preceding two cases can be read as a single volume in space which are divided into two related zones. So in architecture and design. So um, when we think of space, we have the vastness or the unlimited perception of which. That's why sometimes when we, let's say, when we do planning, um, we try to section the space according to its function. So, for example, this area would serve as a, let's say, a theater. So you want the visual perception of a dark and a cavernous effect or a cave-like effect here, and maybe you wanted to bring out the lighter version or a lighter up let's say uplifting color or some or texture or treatment here at the bottom. This can also serve as a multi-level, let's say multi-level office space, where this could be the area for your meetings or when you want enclosed meetings. So the weight on the wall would actually serve as a privacy or as an area for privacy, and this would be your general working area in which you need natural light and brightness to it for you to have to prevent the very like drowsy feeling of that of a typical office space. So building facades with various texture applied from its elements, wood planks, painted concrete, and glass. So this is a good example in which the materials would actually display the different textures or different variety of visual textures and tactile textures. As you can see, the rigidness of the wood would actually give you the idea that this the material is rigid. It's very organic and very raw in its form in relation to the cladding, which is smoothen out. It's a bit more formal approach, and then you have the glass. So in the entirety of the design, it's bordering or it's playing around with materials in a way that it's unprecedented, it's not typical, and it's very playful. So this would vary into the degree of the project and to what the design brief is and how free you are, or let's say um, creative you are when it comes to providing solutions. So in office interior spaces, so you have various textures of materials to actually break the monotony of that of, let's say, a white wall. So in this interior, so you have different visual and tactile textures playing in the space. So you have the big wall in relation to your soft carpeted flooring, and then you have the rigidness of the wood, and you have the plain, so you have the smoothen out texture of that of this wall in relation to the glass in which it lies, and then you have the visual and the tactile the visual texture of the patterns of the ceiling. So all in all, it plays around with the materiality, the application, and the patterns. I think. Thank you. I think So that's it for your elements of design. So we're ending in texture. So we'll be discussing next form in which will be forms in the space. So we'll be discussing that in a bit.